Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about the art movement called Art Nouveau. We talked about Art Nouveau a little bit when we were talking about post-impressionism, but we really didn't get into any details about what Art Nouveau looks like and what it is. I just kind of mentioned it really briefly. So today I'm going to give you background into Art Nouveau and how it came about and what Art Nouveau art tends to look like. So Art Nouveau is just French for new art, and it started in the 1880s and really got going in 1890 and then lasted for about 20 years. And this piece over here on the right is an example of an Art Nouveau piece of furniture, and we're going to get into the hallmarks of this art style and what inspirations Art Nouveau was drawing on. So the first inspiration for Art Nouveau was something called the arts and crafts movement. So at this time, the fine arts, so painting, sculpture, drawing, somewhat architecture, was really separate from crafts, and we do still have that separation today, and it's something that a lot of artists are trying to change, trying to break down those barriers. But there is still the separation in people's minds of high arts and then more crafts. So at this time period, at the late 19th century, things like woodworking, jewelry, furniture making, ceramics, any kind of fiber art, so sewing, weaving, interior design, glassware, this was all considered to be craft. And this arts and crafts movement was really trying to change that, trying to make everything art and to unify everything. And so Art Nouveau was using the same style across all of these different mediums. So you had graphic designers, you had painters, you had architects, excuse me, all working in this similar style, trying to create a unified art style. And then, of course, after about 20 years, it kind of burned out. People got sick of doing the same thing. And so we started to see modernism and all those, abstract paintings and Dadaism and all those like really small movements that started in Europe. And then at this time, photography is kind of off doing its own thing. So some people are considering photography more of an art. Some people are considering it more of just a documentation. So it's got a really contentious place in the art movement at this time. So we don't really see Art Nouveau in photography. We do somewhat, but we don't see it as much in photography. So along with the arts and crafts movement, there is a huge influence of Japanese art. So Japan had been closed off completely for quite a long period of time. They actually had an island that was their only port, so they were not letting ships dock anywhere else in Japan except this one island. And it was like dedicated just to ships landing and bringing goods from Europe. And around this time, Japan opened up. They opened up their ports, and there was just flood of Japanese art that came out into the market. People were really fascinated by it because it looked really different than what was happening in Europe and the Americas at that time. And one of the things that came out was these Japanese woodblock prints. Of course, there was ceramics and jewelry boxes and all kinds of different items, but woodblock prints were small and they were relatively cheap and easy to transport. So you saw a lot of these prints, and they had a really big influence on art. And we talked about this with the post-impressionists, how they were influenced by these woodblock prints, but they also influenced Art Nouveau. So just like with the post-impressionists, we tend to have very flat color. So we don't have a lot of highlights and shadows. So looking at this robe right here, we've got kind of a flat blue, a flat brownish black, and that's it. There's no other modeling. So the line work is working as sort of a shadow, and color is working to differentiate different parts of the drawing. And we do have a little bit of shadowing on the faces, but not very much. And so this use of very flat color is going to translate into Art Nouveau. It's also going to borrow the black outlines. So those of you who did printmaking projects last year, I know we didn't get to ours this year, so some of you haven't done it, but it's really common to use that black outline to show where the edges of objects are when you're doing printmaking. And so a lot of artists adopt that heavy black outline. There's usually a lot of different textures, and we saw that especially in the work of Mary Cassatt. So here we have all these different patterns, different textures. It's a little hard to distinguish one figure from another because of the textures. And then you have textures in the background. And you'll see this in some of the Art Nouveau pieces, the flattened spaces, but not in all of them. And flattened spaces mean that there's not a lot of depth, and so we do see some recession of space, but we only see this single line of trees. There's not really trees behind them. There's not shadows under the feet of these figures. So you have this very flat space that your figures or your landscape is in. And you'll see that in a lot of the Art Nouveau pieces, that flattened space. So just an example of a piece that we probably have seen before, which is The Kiss by Gustav Klimt. And you have an incredible amount of texture, all kinds of different textures, a very flat space, a little bit of the black outline, but he doesn't really use it. What he uses is a lot of texture and a lot of flattened spaces. So along with this influx of Japanese art items, you have 19th century spiritualism. And for those of you who don't know about 19th century spiritualism, it's kind of fascinating because you have this deeply religious, mostly Christian culture in Europe and in America. And then at the same time, you have this interest in mediums, so people who can, contact the dead, interest in ghosts and the afterlife, the occult. There was just this huge popularity of spiritualism in Europe and in America at this point in time. And so people became really interested in symbolism and in mysticism. So you'll see in Art Nouveau a lot of women dressed or representing like fairies or spirits, and a lot of symbolism included inside the pieces. So this piece doesn't really have symbolism in it, but you have this young maiden in a flowing robe, and she does almost look like she's in this sort of fairy-like mystical setting. And so you see a lot of that represented in Art Nouveau in particular. And this is a piece by Alphonse Mucha. And you've probably seen his pieces before and not known who it was because he's still very popular. And here's another piece that does have symbolism. So we have the 4 seasons represented. And of course the outfits change a bit. She is in, a hooded robe. The coloring of the women changes. She has apples, so representing kind of fall and the fruits of, summer labor. The sunflowers clearly representing summer. Spring is sort of wild and chaotic in the background. So it's not unusual to see this sort of symbolism in Art Nouveau pieces. We also have a big counterculture lifestyle going on. So the bohemian lifestyle is extremely popular at this point in time. Along with that, you have feminism. So women are starting to wear pants or bloomers. They are protesting and asking for the right to vote, asking for more money because you have a lot of women laboring in factories at this point. Loose flowing clothes. You do still have the majority of women in corsets, in full, collar that goes up to your chin and sleeves that cover your wrists. But there's this kind of counterculture going on at the same time. And this is a poster by Toulouse-Lautrec. We looked at another poster by Lautrec. when we looked at post-impressionism. And this was probably a poster for a place like the Moulin Rouge, so a dance hall. So really showing that bohemian lifestyle. And of course, this is at the time period quite scandalous. You have these women showing their ankles all the way up to the knee. So to us, this may not seem very counterculture, but at the time, showing the leg all the way up to the knee was not something that appropriate people did. And you can see the influence of Japanese prints. We have the very flat colors. Of course, this is a poster, so it would have been graphically printed. So it makes sense to have flat colors. You have the black outline. You have this very loose, sketchy style. This really harsh angle right here, which is another influence of both Japanese prints and the camera. And then really flat space in the background. And we have a big influence of modern forms. So glass, iron has been, not only iron had been around for a long time, but it was considered to be kind of a modern metal. Concrete, people were using concrete again, and steel. And so these are all considered to be really modern building materials. And you see them a lot in the arts as well as in architecture. This is a lamp by Louis Comfort Tiffany. So still to this day very famous for stained glass lamps and stained glass murals. Obviously Tiffany is no longer with us, but the company still bears his name. And you can still purchase lamps and other items made by the Tiffany company. I actually have a Tiffany lamp on my desk that I'm looking at right now. And so because it's stained glass, you have that heavy black outline and mostly flat color. This is kind of a gradient on the glass itself. So the sheet of glass was made to have different colors in it. And so it does look like there's more depth than you might see with just a flat single color glass pane. But you have very colorful, very expensive, beautiful stained glass lamps. And you also see this in architecture. So again, a lot of iron, steel. This is a very typical Art Nouveau piece. And just moving forward for a second, because I want to talk about the last hallmark of Art Nouveau, which is natural forms. So drawing very strongly on nature, curves and asymmetry, plants or anything resembling plants was used, as well as flowers and animals. You especially see a lot of dragonflies, swans, birds. Those are the three animals that you see the most of. This is a piece of jewelry, a necklace by René Lalique, who is famous for his jewelry, stained glass, sculptures, and you have these very natural curving forms. This is a pretty symmetrical piece, but there's a little bit of asymmetry here in the back and on the sides. And the use of a lot of jewels, gemstones. So going back and looking at the architecture, we can see all these asymmetrical curving forms. So you don't see a lot of straight lines with Art Nouveau. You usually see a lot of curved lines. Of course, it's easier to have straight lines in pieces like this railing and in this post, but you see a lot of the decoration is actually curving lines, almost resembling vines or tree branches. And this is a little blurry, I apologize, but this is Casa Batlló in Barcelona, Spain. And it almost looks like it's this undersea palace. You've got a lot of stained glass, a lot of curves, what appears to be kind of a natural material, although it's probably either stone or plaster, and a lot of color. And we'll just end on this piece by Lalique, which I believe is a pin, so something that you would wear pinned to like a jacket or your hat. And we have, again, the natural form of these cicadas and then a cherry blossom branch. So strong influence of Japanese prints and Japanese art right here in this piece. So we will leave this here, and in the next video I'm going to talk to you about how to start your project and some tips and tricks for doing your Art Nouveau piece.